and thanks, Regan. So trajectory, I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, in a home that we didn't go to museums. We didn't talk about art. Music was rarely played. And it wasn't until I was in undergrad that I found myself in the art department. The professor just said, make things. And I started making things, and I started making more things. And ahead of me was a couple of students that were going on to grad school. I didn't know much about that. And two of them ahead of me went on to Yale University, and it was said to be the best sculpture program in the country. And so that's what I said I wanted. And then just started working really hard at building a portfolio. Went out for the interview, super nervous. Again, really green. Is before internet, so you couldn't look up who was teaching there. I had no idea about this program, but eventually I got into the program, and it was during those 2 years that really focused me, made me a hard worker. And, being in New Haven, Connecticut, would go every weekend to New York to see shows. And it was at that time that my fellow students were all looking at what the next move was going to be. And everybody in my class moved to New York. And I saw what the studios that were going to be like that I would have been going into, and they were all, maybe a quarter size of this tent. And the work that I was doing at the time was architecturally based. It was larger installation, really loved. At the time, there was a installation movement going on. And so I knew if I went back to Minnesota, I knew I would have a generous space. The Walker Art Center was there. I left a scene that I was kind of interested in. I felt like, going back to the Midwest, I can get a handle on that scene. And I wanted to get into New York through the back door, which I did. We have incredible grant funding in Minnesota. And there was this Jerome Fellowship that sent Minnesota artists to New York for their first solo show. And it was through Art in General. And so went to New York, set up an exhibition there, and Holly Block, who is at the Bronx Museum now, they said, one in particular said, what are you doing in February? This is 2 months away. And I said, coming to New York to do my first solo show at a commercial gallery. And that's how it all kind of began. It was just going back to Minnesota, but trying to figure out a way to get, beyond the borders of Minnesota. And so that was my first experience.
Hi, I'm Adam, and it all has been a strange 8 years. I was minding my own business. I was practicing law. I had 2 kids. It was a normal life. And then what really came as words started tumbling out a lot. And my doctor, who is Harvard trained, we'll give her a break on that. She's not from Stanford. She said, I'm going to start calling you my Stanford lawyer who went crazy. She's like, you know what? Let's make sure you're not getting lit up too much with the medicine. Let's see if we lower it, what happens. And thank you to her, because not only do the words keep tumbling out, they really haven't stopped except for depressions. And what comes out, it turns out, is sometimes I've come to decide is art. Anywhere from, I call these things notions, anywhere from like 5 to 50 will pop out on any given day. And I get them down now as fast as I can. I have ways of getting them down. I've trained myself to memorize them when I'm places like here, this moment, when I cannot write them down. So if anything pops in the head, I can keep them for at least half an hour. But out of those, the process becomes, I decide in a cognitive way after this thing sort of happens and these words come out, are they of use? Are they art? What do I want to do with them? What can be done with them? Do they matter? And I'm a conceptual artist, and I'll just lay it all out here on the floor. All of my work seems to have one basic thing. It's got to matter. Not just to me, not my opinions. It's not my views. It's never my experience. It's got to matter to something else. So I massage these words and think about them for weeks, months. Some have actually turned out to be over a year. And then they just sort of pop out one final way, which is I get the picture of how to do it. And you saw 3 things up there, and if you didn't see them, no worries. I never take offense. The one that looks like scribbles popped out in 5 to 6 minutes. I should have timed it. I didn't. That's one cohesive writing. I was there. I didn't stop. It was through multiple oil sticks, multiple pieces of charcoal. They break under the pressure. By the end, I usually have a blister on my writing thumb. Sometimes there's not blood, but it's just I'm exhausted. Others take a lot more time, like an hour per letter. But the point of all of this is doing this sort of went by the seat of my pants and was lucky that at an art fair, someone noticed and gave me encouragement. I was lucky that I met these art friends and they said, don't stop. And I had friends that taught me, this is how you need to paint. You can't paint that way. You do need to paint this. They taught me basics I had no idea about, but everyone's been so generous along the way. So I just decided to say yes to whatever came along in terms of who was helping me get better as an artist, but also never sell out. And so my rule is, I'll flex on the size, I'll flex on the aspect ratio, but the image and the text over my dead body.
Why don't you touch briefly on the impact that, since we have a number of collectors here, the impact that a collector can have on your career?
Yeah, so it was a day I was walking up the street and I got a cell phone call from California, and in Maine, that's a very unusual call to get. And so I fielded the call, and even though I was sure it was my wrong number, and this person says hi, and they quickly explain who they are, first name, last name, that was it. I'd like to talk to you about your art. And I simply said, that sounds great, but I'm sure you have the wrong number. I'm just this guy who I make some art. And he's like, no, I'm pretty sure I got the right guy. When can we talk for more than a few minutes? Turned out to be a major collector from California who saw my stuff online, which is the only place I posted at the time 5 years ago, and said he wanted to do a major commission and also wanted to do big. And I thought big meant 30 inches by 40 inches because that's the canvas you could get at the local art store. He said, how about 10 feet? And as he tells the story, he could almost hear me have a heart attack through the phone because I had not even contemplated something that big. But it's been through his mentorship, size, paints, all kinds of things that I had the courage to not only do that one, but do others and try new mediums like aluminum. He was the one who was generous enough to give me an interview with my current gallery. And thankfully, I passed those 3 screening rounds. It was tougher than most law firms.
Not that mean.
And it's just been those things along the way where people have just been exceedingly generous. So I see collectors honestly as more like collaborators. And again, I just told you my role 30 seconds ago. Role sticks, but I have learned that they're really, in a way, it's a team effort, and everyone brings something to the table because this doesn't get forwarded unless everyone's working together. I mean, ultimately, my stuff is in my head unless someone is decent enough to devote a wall to it. Otherwise, it's just an image on a screen. So thanks.
I think that's really important, actually, because people always ask me how I find artists. And I'd actually known about Chris for a long time through other people in Minneapolis and Minnesota, and also through a foundation that I work with. I found out about Adam through this collector that I'd worked with and been friends with for about 20 years. So they each came to me in different ways. But I think the point being that I've been kind of watching each of them. Chris and I had not been interacting. We had been interacting, Adam and I, over those 3 years before we really came together formally. But the word partnership and collaboration is really important, at least to me in the art world. All of our relationships with our artists are partnerships. It's not ownership. We work on things together. And I think Chris has, I kind of want to move to talking about how they work, because they work in very different ways in terms of focusing on large term projects and then focusing more possibly piece by piece. Chris introduced me to his current project a year and a half ago ish. And I really got it. I felt like I did anyway. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's kind of intense. I hope he thinks I get it. And it was great. So I would love for you to explain how this project came to be and the role that you feel like a gallery can play, because you've been, you've had your ups and downs, we'll just say that maybe with the gallery world. And I think that galleries and collectors and artists working together really can do some good things. So Chris, take it away.
Okay, sure. So I've had positive experience with the gallery world and negative experience where caused me to leave that world for about 10 years until I met Jennifer. And I guess I didn't feel safe. I felt I was taken advantage of. I lost a lot of money. I lost a lot of work, and I didn't trust the system, and mainly worked with nonprofits and museums for the last 10 years. And Jennifer came around about a year and a half ago, and I felt I trusted Jennifer. I felt like she understood my practice. My practice is a lot of arms and legs to it, where it's not. It deals with architecture, it deals with painting, it deals with photography, it deals with performance, it deals with video and film. And I guess I felt like you felt like you could understand the entirety of the work. The work that's up there right now, I wouldn't have recognized it as my work a year ago. Okay, it shape shifts, but the core is always in there. This project started in 2018, and it was when somebody said, you have to come down to this factory in a small town in Tennessee. So I came down, and it was a 20,000 square foot underground factory that used to sew for Ralph Lauren. They sewed polo shirts, and it was intact. It was like a time capsule. Still 300 sewing machines, bolts of fabric, 20,000 spools of polo thread, industrial thread. And after I left the space, I immediately wrote a grant for the Guggenheim. And so I said to the Guggenheim, I'm going to move my studio from the Twin Cities down to Smithfield, Tennessee for 1 year and work out of that factory. I got the fellowship and moved down to Tennessee for 1 year and started to engage with all the stuff down there, the fabric, the thread, the machines. And during that time, I started bringing up, extracting stuff from the factory and bringing it up to my studio in St. Paul and working with all the elements and the materials. Because I believe that anything that I found in there could translate into art making materials. And it was a pretty, tough situation for that little town when a industry like an employer like Ralph Lauren pulls out in 1998. I was given a fact to somebody here earlier that in 1995, 95% of clothing made in the U.S. was sold in the U.S. Now it's 5% is made in the U.S., is purchased in the U.S. So it's quite a departure from what happened with the garment industry within the United States. And it's visible within the town. So one of the questions that I did has is like, what happens in a post-industrial rural community when an industry like that pulls out of a town? The work that you see up there, it's about labor, it's about repetition, it's about residue. The project called the Residue of Labor. And so I've been engaging with these materials like the thread, obsessively wrapping them around the canvas. It looks like canvas, but it's actually fabric that I found that was destined to be on somebody's body as a Ralph Lauren polo shirt. So the works up there are basically a Ralph Lauren polo shirt, but just in a different form. The other piece is the time card piece.
Wait, talk about the thread though, and the miles of thread, and examining that and how you did that in the factory, and then what translates onto those pieces.
So I started.
That's the inside
sure.
scoop.
So I started tying the thread onto the machine. So there's sort of these bursts of colors down in the factory space in Smithville. But as I brought them back up, to talk about labor and repetition, built this machine that can wrap these surfaces. The other one is the time card. I found a ton of time cards. These are the things that the employees would punch in with. And so glued them onto a surface. And this all didn't come. I'm going on 4 years, and I just began to engage with that part of the process just this last year. The show that's going to Chicago, it's about 150 different works that will be in the show in a 10,000 square foot space we've rented down there. And it incorporates video, architecture, these thread works. Some are large, some are 4 by 10 feet. Some are, the smaller ones are here. But it's all been engaging with the materials from that factory into this new body of work.
And I think the important thing that struck me when I first heard or learned about this project and spoke with Chris was, I remember you saying that you hadn't quite figured out what your role was in this whole thing. And, I don't know if this is an oversimplification or not, but you're really telling their story. So you're like the conduit to what has happened down there, and what has evolved and what it became is something very beautiful, right? But I talked to a number of people upstairs. A lot of the artists that we work with have very difficult subject matter and difficult stories, but the end result is something that you can live with. And for me, that point is that you can live with it, think about it, and take it in rather than necessarily be punched in the face with it. And that's, some people really enjoy that. There's nothing wrong with that. But with our program, a lot of the artists do work in that way. And so, Adam, maybe you want to take it from here. You work more on a piece by piece basis. And I think maybe not quite going into the specific pieces upstairs because we will cover the specific pieces, but maybe talk about the 3 ways that you typically work and how those things come about.
Sure. So,
and also why you only work in large format.
Yes, so much. How best to say it? Everything seems to. There's 2 ways to say it. The stuff comes out. I told you about that part. Now the question is like when it's sort of like comes back together. What am I starting to see? I catch glimpses. I just put this on my website of what it's all going towards or coming to, and they are sort of like another level of layers. So on the individual pieces I make, without realizing it, someone pointed out, and thank you, because you've also pointed it out recently, there's a lot of layers in there. I mean, you got the physical materiality. I've got different layers that comprise the actual work. And if you look at it from the side, you see more than if you look straight on. So there's a physical layer part, but then there's more layers than I expected of references, not just to art history, which I've been trying to learn on the fly for 5 years, but also to the stuff I'm more aware of. It could be human history. It could be European history. It could be legal history. It could be even pop culture. All these different things. And there's different types of writing that bleed into the text if it's a longer text. So there's all these layers in the individual work. And if this isn't where you're going, let me know. But what I've been thinking about, I see glimpses that, each work is going to be a standalone, but also a piece of, they're going to bring 30 or 40 layers to the table for a bigger conceptual work. And I keep researching this. I haven't found it yet, but, I see a work of, maybe over 20 years, 5 pieces, 10 pieces a year. It doesn't matter where they are, but collectors are sort of stewards and they hold them, and then they get brought together different ways, or maybe even just thought of all together. How best to say it? I tend to see things differently. People have been telling me that for 8 years now. I tend to just see things a little bit oddly. And that may be useful. It may not be. But if it turns out it is, it looks like there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of layers. Let's do the math. I'm not going to do the math. 20 times 30 times 100, all those layers coming together. And I think that's how I'm starting to work. And I don't see a downside to it. It doesn't seem like a sellout. It doesn't seem like it may have been done before. I don't want to copy anybody. So I'm still researching that. But that's about where things have been and where I am. And I think the last part of your question was, why do I do things so big? Yes. I do things so big because I'm not nervous on the stage. My hand shakes. My hand shakes from 20 years of lithium at a serious enough amount that my hand has the tremors that will occur if you take enough lithium over time. And so if you look closely at how I paint, when I paint the big pieces that have what look to be close to perfect lettering, there are special brushes that I cut a special way. I hold my hand a special way. And I go very slow, about an hour a letter. And you'll see different indentations, the pressure in, pressure out, the side to side. I can't do below 3 inches at this point. I can't, what's the old thing when you're 3 years old? Stay within the lines. I can't stay within the lines. So now we're about 3 inches. That's down from 4 a year and a half ago. I'll be able to keep it. I think my doctor says it's plateaued at this point. The tremors don't get worse. I will not be doing 10-foot lettering. But that's how it goes.
No, thank you. I mean, I think that's an important part of how your work comes out. And then Chris, so we've kind of talked about the ways that you guys work and how different it can be, but there are definitely similarities in terms of layers, as Adam brought up, and you have a lot of layering and erasure in your work, which is like translated through not just this project, but multiple projects before. I also think it might be kind of fun for you to talk about like time and location, and maybe a little bit about the ice, the ice houses, freezing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, a lot of the work does deal with it's challenging a surface or challenging a piece of architecture. A lot of the work I'll build architecture to scale, like a 1-to-1 scale. There was a project I did where I built a Marcel Breuer home to scale. That's a Marcel Breuer small house that's located a couple miles from my studio and brought it downtown St. Paul and burned it down for a festival. You know, that way of challenging it. Or a shotgun house from New Orleans, built a replica in my backyard and froze it and shot a video inside that. Or taking a 2-story typical Midwestern home and floating it on a lake in northern Wisconsin and shooting a video in there. And it's about the idea of like challenging permanence as we think of like architecture as something that's permanent, that maybe in these ways of either challenging it with nature or action of cause and effect, that we can look at maybe architecture as something more fluid. And I think that's what my investigations have taken place. You know, the factory that I was working in, it was so, I guess, set in those 50 years that it was open. And it's like how to engage with a space like that had so much 50 years of heavy labor and production. And as an artist, how do I examine a space in a history that's not my own? Because it's a tough history, right? I come from a place of privilege in the Twin Cities, coming down to a small town where medium income's about 16,000, and me looking at the lives of these people. But, you know, after spending that year and a half with the people, there's still a factory above me that still sews, and they sew for the U.S. government, Department of Defense. And I got to know them, and I got to know the history of them, that when they worked in the space and what that felt like. And there was a lot of commonality just in terms of, I guess, labor and production and repetition. There's a lot of crossover between the artist and the seamstress. And so it was those conversations that became valuable in what came out of the production of these new works.
What is it about? What is it about these really large scale like projects that you take on that's so interesting to you? Is it all the individual components, or is it the challenge of moving a house, burning it down, or freezing it? Like, what is it that really drives at that?
Part of it, after I graduated, moved back to the Twin Cities. This is 91. This is when the art market, I guess, fell apart at different times. And I went to a gallery. Okay, I'll reverse a little bit. I was invited back to teach at Yale for a year. So I went back. And so it was that time I started going to New York and we showed 35 millimeter slides to galleries. And the stuff that I was doing, it was larger scale. And they looked at it and they were like, we can't do anything with this. And I think moving back to Twin Cities, like, okay, if I can't sell these things, I'm going to experiment, work in large scale and work in more of like a theater production, right? Where it goes up, you view it, it's an installation, and it comes down. And I think that's what drove me and it still drives me.
Why is it important to engage with living young artists?
Well, my personal opinion is that what makes a great collector and what keeps people collecting in a real active way is curiosity. And so anybody can have that. There are different ways of collecting. Obviously, some people go through consultants only. Some people are more involved in it. Neither one is better or worse. But I do think one thing that you get from emerging or living artists is much like Adam described. Actually, you get to take a quote unquote stake in that person's career. And, you know, it's not just a one-way street. I actually think it's a two-way street. I think to be able to see where someone's going. I mean, we know collectors in Minneapolis, right? They were buying Warhols at $5,000, you know? So at that time, Warhol was not Warhol. He was more of an emerging living artist. And so I think there are just different things you can get from that. It depends on how much you want to be engaged in that whole process. But I do think that so much comes back to you when you know what that artist's doing. You can follow what they're doing. You can participate in that career. It's just a kind of a different way to go about it. And I personally, that's why I'm here, I find it really rewarding to play that role in their career. And so as collectors, you can choose to do that too.
And I might just add that Jennifer and I met, we were on a board in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and she was the smartest one in the room. And when she took over this gallery, I was like, what are you doing? And I'm thankful that you have done that, really, because you brought some incredible, well, it's true. You brought some incredible artists to the fore that people wouldn't otherwise know. Okay, who's got more questions? Come on. All right. Sarah.
Bring this microphone. So we talk a lot in these kinds of forums about how you can identify an artist that you'd like to acquire work from. But I'm always curious to know, from the perspective of the artist and the gallerist, who are the collectors that you look to work with, and what makes a good collector, and what makes a collector who needs to learn how to collect better?
Well, I guess I'll speak as a gallerist, and then you guys can talk about that too. It's a small world, right? And the art world is very small. So we know who certain people are. We know who certain collectors are and what collections are wonderful to be in. But we don't parcel things out. I love working with new collectors. I love educating people, like I said. So I think what makes a great collector is what I touched on before, is someone that is curious and is engaged and cares. This is an unregulated market. So like any market, I'm sure there are investment people out here that know a lot more about that than I do. But, it's built on trust. And I think it's really important to trust the gallerists or artists or art advisors that you work with, because we're the front line, and we've also done a lot of homework for you. There are certain, things you have to, have accomplished, or certain things that hurdles to get over as an artist to come into our program. And I'm not saying that we will absolutely work with artists, emerging ones that are just freshly out of school. We just did a show with one because I can tell she really has something going on. And so I'll work with her and I'll consult with her. And so, again, it's really more that I think is really important. So hopefully that answered it.
I mean, that's the hope when you make the work, that it finds a home, or whether it be a collector or museum. And it's such a compliment that it resonated with somebody out in the world. And it makes it, as a younger artist, Beth is here and purchased a couple of pieces of my work, and it was such a huge lift to have that happen. And it made such a huge difference just in terms of the production of my studio. And it allowed me not to have a job for a good 4 to 5 months, which is so important. I mean, that's the goal. It's like to try to figure out how to do this and not do the other thing, right? And so little, 1 piece, 2 piece, it makes a huge difference.
But both artists have talked about their bodies of work, and I'm wondering what creates longevity, and what makes your piece ethereal, that you recognize that something you've done is something that's timeless.
Shall I go? I appreciate you asking that, because I think that's a question that's got to. Thank you. I forgot that it works. I think it's an important question, and it's one that I ask myself a lot, because that's, to me, one of the bellwethers. And I was watching something on the flight down from Maine, and the basic thrust was, one of the ways you can tell someone has legs is if they're doing lots of different stuff in different mediums about a bunch of different things, and not just doing the one-trick pony thing. And I think I could slice and dice that concept a bunch of different ways in terms of, subject matter, medium, so you name it. There's at least 14, 15. But I think what it really comes down to is, how does it affect somebody, at least what I've seen so far. So the first time I did something and offhand on my phone, someone saw it and cried, I knew I had hit them. And it was words. It was just raw words. It was no beautiful image. It was black and white. 60 words, I think, maybe 50. And they cried at the end. And then about 2 months later, someone else cried on the same work. And I roughly did the math. I'm like, that's 2 people out of maybe 50 that have seen this. They have nothing else in common. You name it. They didn't fit the same profile. I'm like, that's heading towards universality. That's heading towards something that's got whatever it is. That's the thing you're asking about.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could share any insights on what may be next, what you're working on, and some of the influences that bring this to life for you both.
My projects they are long-term projects, and I'm going on 4 years with this one. And I think there's more in this. There's years more. there are tangents that I'll go off on and do other things for other shows, but I think this has been, I think I'm in the moment right now. And I haven't exhausted it yet.
Yeah, I really think it's actually become a huge part of you. And so, I mean, just to add a little context to that, and I'm trying to shamelessly promote, but his show is coming up in April. And so there's been so much energy in this and around us for so long that I think it's almost hard to think past that. But as working with you, I can definitely see other things morphing out of it. But this is just you're in the thick of it, so it's probably hard for you to think much past it. I don't know. It kind of seems like it, but Adam,
if you don't mind, may I have the question one more time?
What's coming up? Yeah, what's coming up?
Oh, and the influences. Thank you. Yes. Okay. What's coming up is I am honestly very lucky to be. I did it again. That's 0 for 2. I'm very lucky to be with a gallery of this caliber. This has been wonderful as a chance, and I'm not just saying that, but the reality is I've been nurtured. I have been given complete artistic freedom. I pushed the boundaries on my first show last year. I don't do things that are graphic or sexual. I have 2 teenagers. I don't cross certain lines on purpose, but I push First Amendment boundaries, and I got nothing but support. I pushed them on purpose to see what I would get, to see what the limits were. There were not limits. I don't think I've told you this. That spoke as a lawyer. First Amendment rights are very important. So, but where their things are going and what's next, I find myself being influenced by all the great text artists, but also anybody that anyone is kind enough to tell me about. So, people give me a lot of tips pretty often about who I should think about or look into. And the minute I do, I really love them, but then I don't know if I'm allowed to, but I start to say, you know what? That's not exactly all of it. I would like to try more or change it that way or blend these 2 or these 3. So I find myself doing a lot of split hybrids at this point and thinking about how 5 people go together. So Rohde plus Barbara Kruger plus Jenny Holzer plus, well, Christopher is different. He looks different, but then add, Sugimoto for those horizon lines in the sea. The first time someone told me there was a Sugimoto, I was like, really? I was embarrassed. I didn't know. I'm often embarrassed, but I just have to. So I think to answer your question, it's all the influencers just keep heading in those directions in ways I don't really know. I'm just going to try and keep following.
For me, art is it is a deep relationship, and it's a good question of like what's next. But it's kind of I'm in a relationship right now that's so deep that I can't see the next thing coming yet. But I'm so deep in that one, so
yeah, and that's a good thing too.
Hi, I have a non-for-profit in New York, and we're not a commercial gallery, but we have a beautiful gallery, and artists often come to me and say, how much do I charge for this? I really don't like to advise artists myself what they're worth and how much it costs them to make a piece and what their history is in selling. So how do you come up with prices?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? So I have I think all of us like gallerists have some sort of method that we work off of. Mine is sort of rudimentary, and it's not a steadfast, but when I'm looking at Chris or Adam or anyone else's work that's like go on a wall, sculpture's a little bit different. We start off with a baseline of a price per square inch. And what does that mean? And so it sounds kind of cold, but that gives me the ability to say, okay, so when you're growing in your career, we know how you're growing, and we know at this size, this makes sense, and I can justify that. So I will give an example. There is an artist that we've worked with, and he's worked with multiple galleries, and he's worked with ours, and we had him priced at one level. This other gallery put him out at another level, and I called him up and I said, you are just destroying your market right now. Because even if you sell at that, everything that's sitting here or anyplace else is underwater. You're not going to beat that. So I think we really focus on getting these, I kind of refer to them as like tentacles out. Like I'm very conservative in terms of movement, and movement happens in price when things have sold and things stay on walls, right? I'm not a fan of this vertical trajectory without a foundation under it, because that fall is long and it's hard and it's really hard to recover from. So we take very good care to make sure that we're making incremental steps and that our things are staying on people's walls. I hope that answers it. Sort of. It's hard. I mean, I've talked at SAIC grad students, and we were trying to counsel them on how to do this. And I was with a couple other galleries, and so we all have different opinions. But I think if you're under the care of someone that's working incrementally, it's the most important thing. You don't want something that just shoots up and winds up at auction.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you to Adam and Chris and Jennifer. And if you're joining us at table 26, we're going to head over there now. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.